Mark Bowden is the author of many books, most notably Black Hawk Down. And now with Matthew Teague, he's published a brand new book. It's called The Steal, the attempt to overturn the 2020 election and the people who stopped it. Mark, great to see you again. Thanks for coming back to the program. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Michael. Thanks for having me.
The truth is, I was highly skeptical because when I saw the book, when I heard of the book, I said to myself, oh my gosh, another 2020 post-mortem. And the reason that I was willing to get invested in it is because of you and my respect for you and for your work. But I was really wondering before I cracked the cover, what else can possibly be said? I very quickly came to realize that your approach was totally different than all the others. And the word that I would use to describe it is granular. In other words, you did something that none of the other books have done, which is to look at what transpired in 2020 from the ground up, to go to the local election locations and to try and ferret out what was the truth on a lot of the stories that then got whispered down the lane. Fair characterization?
That's exactly what we set out to do, Michael. You're right.
In other words, you saw that there was a vacuum from the top-down perspectives and what was Trump doing at the time and who was in the West Wing and January 6th, all those things that are dominating the headlines, but nobody had done this. The other thing that I thought, Mark, was this had to have been a huge lift, like very labor-intensive.
Well, it was. And as you see, it's the first book I've ever written, Michael, with a co-author.
Right.
We had to do it very quickly, and somewhere early on in the process, I said to Matt, who had actually been hired to sort of run the researchers and reporters who were helping me, would you be interested in helping me write this? Just because I saw, as you say, what a heavy lift this would be.
You remind us that Trump had warned of a rigged election even before 2016. And of course, he won in 2016. I always thought that the reason that he put that out in 2016 was to save face, that he thought he was going to lose to Hillary, maybe even get shellacked by Hillary. And he wanted a record to have been established where he could say, well, I told you I was going to be robbed.
Right. I think that's exactly right. And, I think he does, like many people who are in a competitive situation, try to lay the groundwork so that he has a face-saving excuse if he loses. And that's what I think he was doing in 2016.
While I was reading your book, I was thinking of another book. David Litt, who had been an Obama speechwriter, wrote a book on democracy. And it has a quote that I've kept because I think that it's the best encapsulation of Election Day in America that I've ever read. And he says this, Mark, imagine hearing the following pitch on Shark Tank, a nationwide mega chain with no corporate headquarters, no CEO. It'll operate 8 times as many U.S. locations as McDonald's, serving twice as many customers despite having about half as many employees. Each location will experience nearly double the daily foot traffic of your local Starbucks. Not only that, but every one of these approximately 116,000 stores will be a pop-up, remaining open for a single day, closing for good at night. And oh, by the way, the more than 900,000 workers will be woefully underpaid. That is Election Day in America. And isn't that really your point? Stuff happens because of the way this whole thing is organized.
I think that's right. The fact is that elections in the United States, for better or worse, I actually think have come to believe for better, are not run out of a big building in Washington, D.C. They're run in every neighborhood and community all across the United States by your neighbors and my neighbors, people who are, as you pointed out, not paid for the most part, or who are paid a pittance for doing basically their civic duty. And frankly, it's a very unglamorous job. It's not the sort of work that is generally controversial or attracts any kind of attention or credit. So it really, the notion that somehow these hundreds of thousands of people could somehow be enlisted in some coordinated effort to rig a national election is really preposterous.
And then after those votes are cast, they have to be tabulated. And guess what? Sometimes the ballots may end up in a place like the Chick-fil-A fan zone at the State Farm Arena in Fulton County, Georgia, where a toilet might be leaking. What am I talking about?
Well, you're talking about what became one of the conspiracy theories around the election count in Georgia, where a leaky urinal caused a flood, which caused the election officials to evacuate the counting center for a couple of hours. And the theory became that the people were all being evacuated, the observers, the reporters, in order that this massive switch of votes could somehow take place.
No ballots got wet and no equipment was damaged in Fulton County in that incident. True?
True. And, I would add the election count in that district fell right in line with what was anticipated, because we know in virtually every district of this country roughly what the election count is going to be within a margin of error. So any major shift, like if, say, somebody had inserted 100,000 fraudulent ballots in a particular precinct, it would be so immediately obvious because it would depart from the normal election patterns.
Let me continue to tick through some of these. I won't give them all away. We want people to buy the book. It is called The Steal. But let's talk Delco. I feel like since mayor of Easttown, I can just say Delco and people across the country will know what I'm talking about. Greg Senstrom is a so-called Pennsylvania watchdog, and he is convinced, and you hear this all over the country, people were convinced there's a back room and bad things are happening in the back room. Speak to that.
Well, Greg Stenstrom and his colleague Leah Hoops had formed this Pennsylvania watchdog group because they believed Donald Trump's prediction that the election would be fraudulent and that a big scam was being perpetrated. So they went out on election day looking for fraud. And like many people who go looking for something, they interpreted everything they saw as an example of this massive fraud.
Page 80, I'm going to read a paragraph. Stenstrom had formed a clear picture of what had happened in Delco. Tens of thousands of fake Biden ballots had been pre-printed and substituted for the real ones. This had happened right under the noses of everyone watching at the wharf, distracted by the big show officials made of the count, the Kabuki Theater. Deviously clever, since Trump's loss accompanied so many wins for Republicans in state races, such as Hoops candidate Craig Williams, the party had actually increased its majority in the state legislature. This just confirmed that the GOP had been in on the steal, too. When I read that paragraph, I said to myself, they've got an answer for everything. No matter what level of fact you will hit folks with who don't want to believe that the election outcome was legit, they're going to always come up with something. And it's a whack-a-mole game that you've then got to play.
I know. It's impossible to argue with people who have already made up their minds about something. Years ago, when I wrote a column for the Encore, I made a disparaging reference to those who claimed that NASA had never actually landed astronauts on the moon. And I got, as you, I'm sure know, lots of, angry emails about this. How can you say that? And one of them said, well, if astronauts had actually landed on the moon, why can't we find pictures of their landing sites through the big telescopes on Earth? Well, we can. And then I found pictures, sent them to this correspondent, who then said, oh, well, how easy would that be to fake?
Right. Or the flag never waved. I remember all of those things. All right, let's go to Michigan. Antrim County, Michigan, where Cheryl Guy is the county clerk. Not lost on me is that on election day into night on 2020, works literally to 5 a.m. And then I think is like going out for Egg McMuffins to try and support the people who've worked at her side, and makes a mistake. What happened?
Well, she realized that working with the computerized vote sorting equipment that she had, that she made a mistake. She realized this on her own, and it had transferred thousands of votes from Trump to Biden. So she went in that very day and said, I made a mistake, and fixed it. But the fact that that mistake had been made was an opportunity for the Trump camp, who sent lawyers in on private jets to try to convince Cheryl Guy to say that, no, she hadn't made a mistake, that the machines had automatically switched the votes from Trump to Biden. This, of course, would be evidence of one of the major claims that Trump was making, that the voting machines were all rigged. Cheryl Guy refused to lie, basically. She said, no, the machines didn't make a mistake. I made a mistake.
She owned it. Yeah, and I mean, a great example of what David Litt was talking about in that Shark Tank pitch that I read aloud, where this is what you're going to get when suddenly thousands of people come together from across the country and have to create a one-day apparatus and are woefully underpaid and unsupported for their role. Here's another example. Pima County, Arizona. There were 6,660 so-called duplicated ballots, and to Linny Stone, there was great significance in that numerology. What am I talking about?
Well, Linny saw the signature of Satan in the election spreadsheets. Now, this is, her belief, and it's rather bizarre. And you would think this is of no consequence. I mean, this is what this woman believed. And there are all kinds of people who have theories about things in the world. Linny Stone became the lead individual plaintiff on the national lawsuit filed by the Trump organization in their compilation of allegations of fraud around the country. And it illustrates how they were willing literally to accept any allegation of fraud, no matter how bizarre, no matter how easily disproved, and no matter how obviously wrong.
Maricopa County, Arizona. People listening or watching on YouTube will remember hearing about this. Marko Trikovic was worried about Sharpies and how they were pushed on Trump voters. I love the observation you make in the book. If you buy into sharpiegate, how did they know which of those coming to vote were the Trump voters who should get the aforementioned Sharpie? What's this all about? You investigated it. What did you find?
Well, what I found, Michael, was that the ink pens were causing some of the voting machines to gum up over the course of the day. There were a lot of people voting, and they discovered, the county election officials, that Sharpies didn't leave an ink residue, and so they actually worked better in the machines. So they began urging voters to please use the Sharpies. Well, Marko Trikovic, who was a Trump activist, just assumed that if Sharpies were being pushed on people, this must be a plot to steal the election from Donald Trump. So he started telling people, don't use Sharpies. The machines don't register the votes on Sharpies. And this became a huge issue in Arizona involving the attorney general. It led to legislation to ban the use of Sharpies. And it turns out Sharpies actually work better than ink pens.
Thank God. Yeah, Dominion machines actually work better with Sharpies. Thank God you went back and ferreted out all of these nuggets that we all heard about, but then, moved on to something else in the news cycle. One or other of the sort of human anecdotes. Rob Weissenbach, the postmaster in Erie, Pennsylvania. Here's a guy just trying to do his job, and now he gets caught up in all of this, and mistruths are spoken about him. He goes home, and somebody's waiting in his driveway for him. That's what really worries me.
Yeah, he was terrified. He and his family fled and went into hiding. And they aren't the only ones. We found instance after instance of local officials, local volunteer workers who were subjected to such harassment, to so many threats, that they went into hiding, that they feared for their lives. And I do think this is the kind of thing that we need as a country to do a better job of preventing.
But Mark, how do we combat this? How do we instill confidence in the system?
Well, I think we should have confidence, number one, in the system, because every one of these efforts that Trump made in the 6 swing states, including all 61 lawsuits that he filed, failed. There was not a single legislature in this country that gave in to his bullying and cajoling to change the outcome of the election. So I think we should be somewhat confident in the honesty, the basic honesty of the American people. Secondly, I think we need to absolutely ensure that the vote count is the one certified, that we don't have legislators stepping up and throwing out the popular vote and saying, no, we're going to send a slate of electors for the candidate we prefer, not the one that was chosen by the people. That there's a loophole. It's an old law. That is still possible, and it's what Trump tried to exploit. And the other thing is we need to prosecute people who are threatening and harassing election officials and volunteers, because it undermines the way our system works.
And I should say something because it needs to be a part of the record of your book. There are a lot of people who were supportive of Donald Trump that you write about who would have loved for him to win, but were unwilling to go along with this whole charade. One other thing about the book that I really appreciated, the appendix. So there are 3 components of the appendix to the book, The Steal, and in the first of them, it's a list of House members who objected to certifying the Electoral College results and quotes attributed to many of them. Then you've got the Senate members who similarly objected. And then third, Appendix C in the book is a listing of every one of the cases, a guide to the lawsuits filed to challenge the election results. So all in one place, there it is. Who voted to go along with it? And what actually came out of all of this litigation? Why were you compelled? I've never seen anything like this before, but then again, I've never seen a subject like this before. But why were you compelled to take the space of the book for the 3 appendix?
Well, because as you said, Michael, our approach was granular. We wanted to get to the bottom of this. We wanted to know exactly what happened in these 6 swing states and who was responsible. Who were the people pushing to overturn the election? Who were the people who stood in their way? And I think, this goes back to my years at the Philadelphia Inquirer, when Gene Roberts would always encourage us to zig when everyone else zagged. I mean, I knew and Matt knew that the events around January 6th, the Trump administration, the people around him would be exhaustively investigated and reported. We didn't need to add our voices to that. But the one thing that I think was not being done was taking a look at what actually happened on the ground around the country. And there, I think the real threat to the election was, and I think it's important that we document exactly what that consisted of and who was involved with it.
Obviously, a lot of work went into this project. Congratulations. I'm so glad that I read The Steal, and I wish you all good things.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
That's Mark Bowden. Matthew Teague is his co-author, The Steal, ladies and gentlemen. You'll want to read that book.